Hi everybody, this is Thomas, and in this short presentation, I wanted to go over some tips and recommendations for revising your group presentation. This is based on my observations from taking a look at the first drafts of the group presentation that I did last week. There's 5 things I want to talk about. Number one, I want to talk about previewing the organization of your presentation. Number two, I want to talk about organizing your info. This is in your background and analysis section. Number three, documenting the sources that you use in your presentation. Number four, developing your recommendations. And number five, designing slides. First of all, when you preview your organization at the beginning of your presentation, you need to keep that list short. The preview is not a outline and it's not a table of contents. That's not what your audience is interested in. What they really want to know is just what are the major sections of your presentation. So this is just an example. Here's a presentation. Here's 3 points. Job market projections. Number two, the impact of AI on computer science professionals. And number three, recommendations. So notice here, I don't need a separate item for the introduction, since that's kind of what's happening. And you don't need a conclusion. Readers, your members of your audience will automatically assume there's a conclusion. And you don't even need to list your references. They'll see the references, that'll come up, but it doesn't have to be on the preview. You just want to give your audience a sense of what the major sections are. So let's keep that section where you preview or keep that slide where you preview the organization of your presentation. Let's keep that short and simple. Number two, let's talk a little bit about how you organize the body of the presentation. This is what, if you look at the rubric, it's the background and analysis sections. This is before you get to your recommendations. When you get to that section of your presentation, you want to start by previewing your major points. What are the major points you're going to make? Number two, you want to foreground the information you present over the sources. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. And then at the end of that section of your presentation, you want to summarize your major points for your audience. Here's what I mean by foregrounding information over your sources. I want to talk about for a minute previewing your major points. At some point at the beginning of this subsection, you should say, and maybe I'll even see this on a slide, we have identified 4 major impacts of AI on computer science professionals. A, B, C, and D, whatever those things are. So you should get a little preview of this at the beginning of the body of your presentation. And again, I put this in quotes here because it's something I probably expect someone to say, and I might even expect to see this on a slide, this list of your 2 or 3 or 4 things or however many things you have. Here's what I want to say. In quite a few of the presentations that I saw last week, the body of the presentation was organized around sources. So it was common for me to hear people say things, our second source, and then sort of a summary, or our third source. This kind of organization might make sense if you were presenting a summary presentation or what we call a review presentation. But that's not what you're doing in this presentation. You are analyzing the impacts of a particular trend or topic on your profession. There's a lot of projects that are doing the impact of AI. There are some projects that are doing the impact of climate change. There's a few projects that are doing the impact of vehicle electrification. Those are the things that I want to hear about. The sources themselves are just used to support your discussion of the major impacts. So rather than organizing the body of your presentation around sources, what I want is for you to organize the body of your presentation around these impacts. The impact of AI on computer science. What's the first impact that you want to talk about? What's the second impact you want to talk about? And again, I'm not saying you have to have 4, but I'm just saying this is how you might organize that, okay? So you want to foreground the information, the impacts over the sources. You're using the sources to develop your observations, but the sources are not the core of the presentation. And then You also want to summarize the major points. Once you get done with that, you want to talk about our research has identified 4 major impacts of vehicle electrification on electrical engineers, A, B, C, and D. Remind us of what those 4 things are. It's really smart, and I think audience members would expect you to identify your sources in your presentation. But you don't need to include the title of the sources that you're mentioning, particularly source or titles that are very long. So it's completely appropriate to say something like, in a 2023 article in Forbes magazine, writer Thomas Trimble argues that demand for new battery designs will require mechanical engineers to blah, 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 blah. That's fine. I probably don't need the title of the article. Like I said, those are long. They take up a lot of oxygen. You probably don't need to do that. I probably do need to know the year, maybe the name of the publication, and wherever available, maybe the name of the writer. Now, there's no right way, there's no rule for documenting the source on the slide itself. But what I've done here, and this is a suggestion I made in several of the presentations that I looked at last week, is just to make a note at the bottom of the slide that indicates the source. So here you say, I said source, the name of the author, 2023. And that would be APA style, right? The name of the author, and then the year of publication. Again, here, I don't need the full citation as it appears on the references page. That takes up a lot of space. It adds a lot of text. If the writer was really, if the audience is really interested in finding and tracking down this source, they can take this information, Trimble 2023, and they can look at that references slide at the very end of the presentation. But they don't need to see the entire the entire citation here on the slide. And I would be consistent about this. If you want to put the source in the lower right-hand corner, then I would do that for every slide where you mention a source. So again, you're just creating some redundancy there so your audience knows that if there's a source mentioned on a particular slide, they can sort of see a little citation for it in the same spot. Again, there's no rule that says it has to go in that lower right-hand corner, but having some redundancy there so your audience starts to know where those sources are going to appear, I think is a good thing to do. Many teams came up with really excellent recommendations for current majors, but there were also quite a few presentations that had very general or had at least in their list, some really general. So not to judge anybody, but there were some people saying like, well, current majors need to practice critical thinking or practice what was the other one? Mindset, right? These are very general things. I'm not really sure people know what they mean. I'm not really sure that they mean anything. So avoid overly general recommendations. Try and come up with as specific recommendations as you can, whether that's taking certain kinds of courses, getting certain kinds of experiences, doing certain kinds of research, but avoid sort of general type recommendations that I think really don't mean anything. And wherever possible, try and develop your recommendations with the support of sources, so that your audience can see that there's other people out there who are also making these recommendations. You can use logic to offer your recommendations, to develop your recommendations, but sources will certainly help. So wherever possible, and like I say, try and make those as specific as possible. Slide design. Let's keep that rule in mind, or guideline in mind from our book. One idea per slide. That's still something that I think people are struggling with. It's fine to have multiple slides with information. Again, that adds movement to your presentation. The audience feels like you're moving from one thing to another. It helps keep their attention. You don't want to linger on one slide for too long. I think the book makes a general recommendation that you shouldn't linger on any slide for about 30 seconds, for any longer than 30 seconds. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a pretty good guideline. So let's stick to that guideline of having one idea per slide. So what does that mean? That means like one sentence or phrase, maybe with a graphic if you need one, or maybe one dotted list with a stem and a dotted list. If you've got several items in that dotted list, consider using the appear animation so that you can again add some movement to that slide. But let's try and stick with that one idea per slide. And if you're going to put a sentence on a slide, let's keep that sentence short. Okay? So there's my recommendations. If you have any questions at all about your presentation, your team's presentation, send me an email. I'm also happy to meet on Teams if you want to talk about your team's presentation. The presentation is due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, December 10th. You can turn it in whenever you want, but that's the deadline. If you have your group late pass that's still available, you can use it. That gets you those 48 hours, no penalty extension. But again, if you have any questions at all, email me and let me know. Okay? All right.